Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's warm out, and I'm just back from the hospital, so it's a little late. The situation in Ukraine raises all sorts of questions about the brutality of man against man. When I was in high school and trying to figure out what World War II was about, because my uncle and dad were both in the service during World War II. My dad was Army Air Force, and my uncle Charlie, he was over in, Africa and then Italy. So I was curious when they would tell their rare stories what happened there, how Hitler became Hitler, how he succeeded. But the one of the biggest things was the brutality. And I don't know if you're familiar with a place called Babi Yar. And Yar means ravine, if I remember correctly. And Babi, I think, stood for mom. I'm not sure. The reason it's so significant is that it was in Kiev that Babi Yar occurred. That is, the terrible suffering and outrageous abominations on humanity when 33,000 Jews were killed by the Germans there. It makes it ironic when you have Putin talking about the Nazis he's coming to get rid of. And it makes me wonder if in his mind, and I can't imagine it's otherwise because he's such a historian to his own ends and purposes, that Bucha, the recent situation in which there was a mass murder, smaller but no less detestable and hateful and unnecessary and criminal and extraordinary for a world that considers itself civilized and mostly democratic when it's not autocratic and dictatorial, as is the case with Putin. So we have, just as we had in Babi Yar, mass graves, and the mass graves and dead that we're counting, according to the recent numbers, is 405. And there's been a representative from the International Court of Justice there who's thought that what he sees is genocide, certainly a war crime. And our President Biden has not only declared Putin a war criminal, but he has said this is an act of genocide. Some think there's a distinction that he hasn't said that Putin is responsible for it. I think if you're talking about Russia, an autocratic state, you're talking about Putin. How can it be anything else? It's one of those things that you do in the LSAT, transitive, A equals B, and C equals B, then C equals A. Anyhow, that's my analysis of that. Now, what I've seen with Biden, which I find encouraging, and among my friends, Charlie Kaiser will probably be glad to hear me say that. He's an outstanding journalist, and we have had some divisions on how do you approach the situation in Ukraine. But what we see is kind of a reference back to how FDR handled what was going on in Europe in World War II. And we've seen a progression of acts by Biden that has gone from sanctions to more and more military supplies to fight the war. And now I think he's taking another step to provide even more powerful weapons that could win the war for Ukraine. And I think that's important. I would like to see a point where we get into it and we mop up this operation, because there is no way, and this is where I may disagree with my longtime friend Charlie, there's no way we can ever have a peace agreement with this guy. I mean, you wonder why Hitler committed suicide. He knew he couldn't sit down with anybody and make a settlement after the Holocaust, of which Babi Yar was an element of it, if you will, 33,000 Jews. So we can never have a peace with this guy, it seems to me, because we can never trust him. We had agreements about the security of the nation and non-interference that Russia promised and didn't act upon. So there's that. Another story that kind of interests me is the story of those who get close to the Secret Service. And in my lifetime, I've watched a number of people who become fans, idolize certain law enforcement and do everything they can to be close. And apparently this group, who doesn't really have the resources, spend a great deal of money on these Secret Service agents that everybody agrees should have known better than to trust them, given that their credentials were a little thin, perhaps made up. But and there was a sheriff in Loudoun County at one point, and there were these guys, they wanted tanks and things like that, and they just want to be like law enforcement even though they're not. The danger with these guys is that they were getting methods and sources of defending the President of the United States. And that's where it stops being, simple police or law enforcement idolatry. It becomes dangerous when you're compromising security that way. And so I think it's right to prosecute them out of an abundance of caution, even though we cannot be sure, according to the report so far, of what exactly they were up to. And finally, Holly is slowly getting the kind of strength to stand and walk short distances. She's had diagnostic tests to look at her lungs and so forth. Takes a lot of energy out of her, and there's a lot of people supporting her, cheerleaders, myself included, obviously. And but we are also sensitive to the fact that when she does some of these things, it takes enormous energy out of her, and she just has to rest. So for those of you out there, I'm glad to have had another opportunity to have a walk and talk with you, and I'll do it when I can. My schedule is a little crazy, as I've explained to you, but my first priority is Holly, and my second priority is my cases, and my third priority is all the animals we have. So be well, all the best, and I am back in my cathedral of trees. Bye-bye.